true. It's how interesting that yeah, this organized religion is it's problematic, and people are not. I think they're too scared to call it out because they want to call out the other group, but they can't call out their own because they're also part of that bigger umbrella of organized religion. So they have to target specific, religions instead of saying, oh, all religions are bad.
Hmm.
And I don't believe that all religions are bad because I don't think that they're equally vile and violent, some worse than others, and
Hmm.
some not really violent at all, I would say. Yeah, and some are not even religions. They're just kind of ways of being.
And yeah, and I would agree with that as well. And I have seen that there's a certain intolerance for in the South. Apparently, I've seen saw a video recently of a pastor who was saying that the police should be going around killing gay people, and I know that that's not like a typical evangelistic pastor. I'm sure this is
It's
just a a little a
one-off.
one-off maybe, but the fact that that exists means that
Yeah.
there are these radical versions of pretty much.
Yes, and they're taking their book literally because I'm sure in the
Mhm.
Bible there are some verses. It's not saying
There are, yeah.
um, this is a good thing. They're not saying LGBT is a thing. Although people joke about it, they're like, Jesus, was he gay? I mean, he was hanging out with 12 dudes all the time,
Hmm.
right? He didn't have any women in his life. I mean, I don't know about that, but but if you tell this to the evangelists, they'll blow you up.
And and what were your thoughts about yoga in the West?
Oh my God, thank you for bringing this up. This is such a big topic. So, yoga is something very dear to myself because it's a part of my culture and I'm very proud of it. It's funny that Kashmir actually happens to be the seat of yoga in the world because the person who wrote the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali, and his the descendants came from the valley of Kashmir. Even the name of Kashmir comes from the sage Kashyapa, who was an Indian Hindu sage many years ago, and his people ended up writing the Yoga Sutras. So, in a way, the nucleus of spirituality is Kashmir. So it's such a important thing to hold on to that in a deeper sense, or to not lose the spirituality because it's had a demographic change where it changed religions, right? It became over majority Muslim in a matter of decades, and it's forgetting its own roots in a way, which is very sad and dangerous. But so yoga essentially means union of the mind, body, and spirit. The one of the You don't find this in India, but I was shocked and baffled to see it out here in the West at some by some yoga people themselves. This narrative that yoga is not religious. I actually disagree with that. I think I believe that it's not a religious um, practice, but it's a Hindu practice. And Hinduism is not a religion by that
Hmm.
logic. So I think it's very important because in the West here, I see a disassociation of yoga from Vedic tradition, from Hinduism. You can't remove it from India because that's where it came from, and you can't refute that. But I think there's some, pseudo yoga teachers here in the West at conferences. They try to say, "Oh, yoga is not Hindu; it's a secular practice." That's actually very, very disingenuous, and that is very insulting to actual Hindus, where it is a part of our faith. I'm a Hindu. I don't consider Hinduism as a religion at all. And by the way, there is no such thing as Hinduism because the real name for Hinduism is Sanatan Dharma, and that's the root of Indic faiths. So Sanatana Dharma gave root to Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Hinduism is you would call. I mean, some people don't use the word Hinduism; they just use Sanatana Dharma. But there's this kind of very malicious attempt by I don't know what I'm trying to. I mean, I'm sure there are some there's a reason for it. Why would you try to disassociate a beautiful practice from the faith that it comes from? Because look at the how it breaks down. Yoga is a Vedic science. The Vedas are the holy books and holy scriptures of Hindus. So a Vedic science, which is part of those scriptures, would be part of Hinduism, So for us, and yoga, by the way, is not just the asana. The asana is the physical postures. So here in the West, it's become a stretching exercise, and that's not what yoga is. Yoga is an eight limbed kind of a religious traditional philosophy. One of those eight limbs is the asana, which is the physical postures, but there are others. There's meditation, there is knowledge, there is vegetarianism, there is moksha, which is spiritual liberation, there is speaking the truth, there is mindfulness. So all these things are Vedic principles, and they form what is called yoga. And in India, we yogis are people who follow all of them, and as even as a in school or in general upbringing, people are taught meditation and mantras, and most people are vegetarian, and ahimsa, non-violence. People think ahimsa is a Buddhist concept. It's not. It's a Hindu concept, just like dharma, karma, moksha. They're all Hindu Vedic dharmic concepts, and but they've been sort of appropriated so, I guess, in such a bad way, where people are, I even hear Steve Bannon talking about dharma and karma. Oh my God, I mean, it's hilarious. I'm like, hey, I'm happy that everyone says karma these days. Everyone says dharma. Oh, I want to find my dharma in life. It's a beautiful thing, but you have got to give some respect to where it came from, because somehow they're trying to disassociate it from the knowledge system that it came from, which is Sanatana Dharma, which is Hinduism. You can't do that. I think that's very bigoted. And it's not okay, because you don't do that with other religions. You don't say that, baptism is not Christian, it's just spiritual. I mean, very specifically Christian. Sufism, by the way, is a beautiful kind of mystical arm of Islam. So a Sufi practice, which I've done, like whirling or chanting, it's wonderful, but it's an Islamic practice. You can't say it's not Islam, it has nothing to do with Islam. It's Sufi, it's esoteric. That's not true. That's a little bit like yoga, you can't say, oh no, it's not Hindu, it's some spiritual philosophical thing. It's not. It's very Hindu. We have Sanskrit mantras. We invoke the Surya god, the Surya, and the names of the poses are in Sanskrit. They are very specific. We chant. We have a mantra at the beginning. We invoke our deities. It's very Hindu in many ways. So, and you're asked to become a vegetarian, and you're asked to follow the tenets of yoga when you do the poses. Proper yoga, Ashtanga and Iyengar yoga, follow it properly. They understand it's a Hindu practice. So what is the end to this? What is the solution to this? I don't know. I think there has got to be number one awareness, because when you have
Excuse
a
me.
situation where you're not even having people having a conversation like I'm having, talking that saying things like it is very much part of our faith and religion, I mean, faith and culture, it is. And you have got to have some reform at some point. I don't know how you got to regulate it in a way that I think is very hard to do, because it's been so taken over. But you got to do something. I as a Indian and as a Hindu and as a yoga instructor, as a practitioner, I'm very appalled, I think, by the state of yoga in the West, and how they use terms like namaste
Excuse
and
me.
everything. I mean, if I have to hear one more English white chick called Lakshmi, go on about, all these things, it just, I flip out, So the beautiful thing about Hindu culture is it's open, it's an open source system, it's open technology, it's for the world to use, and the world has benefited from it for thousands of years. So many things like science, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, so many wonderful philosophical concepts have come from Hindu thought and Vedic tradition. Uh, Finally, we're having a situation where historians are giving it the credence that it needs, because I think for too long people wouldn't even cite the source. There have been so many wonderful thought leaders and philosophers that were so in awe of Vedic philosophy, and but they didn't even say that I got this thought from there. It's only now that I think they're uncovering. Now there's a huge movement where quantum physicists and scientists are even talking about uh, really deep scientific concepts that they first found its origins in Vedic texts that they didn't want to tell the world about, because guess what? Bigotry was around ever. It's not a new concept. It was always there. They sort of appropriated it and claimed it as their own. And it's only now that we have some fair historians and scientists talking about these things, where they are talking about where is his origin, and what even something like plastic surgery and surgery, even the word sutra, which is in even in medical terms today, in a hospital today, in an operation, the doctor will tell the nurse, we need to do a sutra for this patient. Sutra is a Sanskrit word that means binding. And the first uh, example of plastic surgery was rhinoplasty, nose job that was done thousands of years ago. To this was in India.
Hmm.
I mean, the world needs to know about this.
Hmm.
It baffles me that such an old ancient tradition with so much wisdom, where has the why, as a world people, why do we not know about it, but yet we know so much about Greek mythology and Greek philosophy when it was 3,000 years newer
Hmm.
uh, than the old Indus civilization. So that's where
Hmm.
that's where I see yoga going. I'm happy to see that people are bettering themselves, but I'm not happy to see some of the hijacking and the distortions and the misappropriations that's happening, by the way, from the yoga community. It's not happening from some outsider. It's
Hmm.
happening from people who have benefited greatly from the very technique itself, that are out there to smear India and Hinduism in such a way which is not okay.
And is it the attribution of where it's coming from? Is that the part that kind of bothers you the most, or is it the separation from the religious aspect in the practice of yoga in the West?
I think it's not so much separation of religious aspect, but it is separation of philosophical aspect and separation of sort of
Hmm.
tradition. Um, you can't sort of take what you like and throw away the rest, which is what's happening with yoga and in general with Hinduism. Because even when you look at meditation, I hear people like Eckhart Tolle, he goes on about presence and the present moment. These concepts were, available first in some of the Hindu Shastras and the Vedas and the Gita and all of our ancient texts. So it's been around, and the Western, there's a lot of German philosophers that have massively researched Hindu history, and they have been inspired and they've taken these concepts, but they don't give it the respect and the acknowledgement. And that's, I think there's some kind of internal, I don't know what to say, I don't want to say bigotry or racism, but what is it? It's something that doesn't let you, what's the matter? It's not sexy enough for you. You have to, I
Right.
don't like it. It's not. I think it's one thing for maybe Western people or American people or Europeans don't get it because
Hmm.
it's not their culture. But for me, I do get it, and I find it
Hmm.
quite offensive because, and also there's a lot of Indians who don't get it, but they're not in this field. They may be lawyers or doctors. They know very little themselves of their own history,
Hmm.
so they don't have a problem with any of this stuff. But if you are in this field, you will see the bigotry that exists, and it's not okay.
Hmm.
And it's funny. Tulsi Gabbard is a candidate that we both like. I really am such a big fan of hers, and her policies are fantastic, and she's such a composed leader. But she's a practicing Hindu, and some of the I was shocked to see some of the attacks on her as a candidate, as a
Hmm.
policymaker, actually come from a subversive source of religious bigotry, where people just don't like that, or they're attacking her for her personal faith.
Hmm.
And this attack on her, by the way, is not coming from the right. they actually give her a fair platform. I've seen her on on more right platforms. I think she has a good space there. But have seen her, the DNC screw over with her, and so many things from her own people. And there is this underlying, oh, this is her faith, and she's, there are other Indian Hindus out there, but she's a, I think that she even has mentioned this in an interview once, that the her presidential candidacy has shed light on religious bigotry that exists in America, and it does.
Hmm.
And she's a good example of that, and I find it unjust justifiable. It's
Hmm.
one thing if Hindus were blowing up buildings every other day, and you're a bit concerned about her faith.
Hmm.
It's not the case at all. Why the
Hmm.
hate? What is going on? It baffles
and
me.
and I'm not, obviously we are going to come in contact with different information, but I have seen a lot of criticism from her about her on the right as well as the left, and
Yes.
and it is pertinent to point out the fact that she does have quite a bit of history with the DNC, and possibly a lot of bad blood there when she removed herself from the DNC. And
The conversion. Oh, that too, and also the conversion thing. But I think that's far
but
removed
but
now.
and as far as the Hindu thing, I think that you know kind of welcome to America. There's never been anyone but a Christian president, except for just a couple exceptions, and they were just non-practicing, non-religious.
Well, Obama is one of them. I think people fail. They don't want to go there, but I'm sorry that those are the facts. It's even in his name. Yeah, non-practicing for sure, but you can't remove his own
But I mean,
heritage.
his
Because
outright. I mean, he, I believe, declared himself as a Christian. Uh,
yes, but his father was a Muslim,
mhm.
and his name Hussein,
Right, Barack
as
Hussein.
Muslim as it gets. You can't sort of,
Right.
and his foreign policy, I have a lot of criticism for, was, I think it was atrocious. I think some of he was a little too soft on all this radical Islamic terrorism, and also with Iran, and he was trying to negotiate with people that you're you can't negotiate with terrorists. They're beyond that. So I was very disappointed with how much the left shields him and applaud him when I see through the cracks. And I
Mhm.
think it was, and I think some of the criticism that comes from the right of him and his sort of governance was very legitimate. In this foreign policy area, it was very
In that
bad.
particular area, there's a lot of other criticism from the right
Yeah,
that just has a lot to do with
yeah,
bigotry
unjustified.
and
Sure,
and
sure, sure.
uh,
Of course.
and so and I personally, at the time, I voted for Obama. I was a fan of Obama in the moment because, like
Yeah.
a lot of people, he's a charismatic guy, and he seems like a decent fellow. And as far as the reporting went at the time, there wasn't a lot of good information about the sorts of things that he was doing. And in hindsight, there's more obvious things like the bailouts
Yes.
uh, to the bankers and
And the
and the
deportations and all of that.
deportations and all of those things
Yeah.
that under the Trump presidency would be under so much scrutiny, and that's why I personally think a president like Obama is slightly more dangerous to uh, just our
Because
global politics.
it's a wolf in sheep's clothing in that context, in that particular
That he
sense.
doesn't
Yeah.
garner any scrutiny that a
Yes.
president or any leader should have,
Yes.
and that Trump is kind of the opposite in that sense that
Yeah.
everything.
He's getting way too much scrutiny, and even for some of he's done some very good things
Mhm.
too, and all he gets is venom and hate.
Well, I
So
think he's made some choices that make sense and some choices that don't make
yes.
sense, which is true of every single presidency. But
Yeah.
I think the part that really sets him aside and sets him apart from all the previous presidents is that he kind of threw the rule book out of the window from day one,
Yeah.
and has used a lot of the divisiveness that is currently part of the political landscape to his
Yeah.
advantage, and used that kind of demagoguery to rally up these people who are sometimes going to be voting against their own best interest in the case of a lot of the factory workers whose jobs they're seeing deported out of the country now at this time. So I think that there's definitely problems with all of the presidents
Yeah.
that we've had so far, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that they are figureheads more than they are actual, you know,
Policymakers and
policymakers.
to enforcers,
Right.
that's true. But I have some good news for you. She made it to the fourth. She's going to be doing the fourth debate.
Hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's what I saw in the news today. So I guess this is going to be a
Hmm.
trip. I really want to see who she's going to take down
And
next.
I really appreciate Tulsi's
Yes.
anti-regime change
Or
war stance on the military, um, and if there's people on the right that support that, I'm excited about that, because I think that's one thing that the establishment on both the right and the left are both for, is war. Uh,
And I was shocked to see, aren't you shocked as someone who identifies with, you're more the left, I would say, but you, the pro-war stance that has been coming from the DNC, is
I'm not
appalling.
shocked at all,
You're like,
actually.
really?
I'm not surprised
I
one
think
bit.
many people, I was a little worried. I'm like, because what, I like, you should be behind someone like Tulsi, who's totally
Hmm.
against all this bull crap. And the way that they are so, even all the left, even CNN, and even the host, everyone, the way that they take her
Hmm.
down for such a good policy, it just baffles
Well,
me. I'm like, what is going on with you
and
guys?
I've seen the mainstream media take down whoever they need to
Yeah.
do the bidding of whoever's running the show there. But it does seem like uh, and then I keep losing my train of thought here. But what were we just talking about the
We were talking about religion and
religion?
the
Yes.
religious ideologies and stuff. No, yoga and the yoga in the West,
Hmm.
and and also Tulsi. She came up, and I'm happy to see her. And yeah, I mean, I think religion and politics is so intertwined now
Hmm.
in a way that they've never been, now, because now they've become political tools, I guess, in some way, in many ways. So but also getting back to religions, yeah, I think people need to realize that organized monotheistic religions are problematic. And one point that people don't sort of, people who are, whether they're Christians or Muslims, they don't sort of talk about is uh, sort of the lack of mutual respect that exists in the exclusivist mentality that exists in these monotheistic religions, where it's there's only one God, there's only one book, there's only one prophet, and uh, there's only one version of the truth, and my God is better than yours. And if you don't believe in him, you're going to
Hmm.
hell. you know this is pretty much the rhetoric you hear from all of the monotheistic religions. And I come from a faith that is uh, extremely polytheistic, and
Hmm.
it's not even a religion, but whatever it is, it's so open and tolerant and always has been. In fact, the essence of Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma is all paths can take you to the divine. All paths can take you to moksha, which is the ultimate goal of life, which is spiritual liberation. They're essentially saying you can be a Christian, you can read the Bible and pray to Jesus Christ, just be a good human being and you can attain moksha.
Hmm.
Christianity will not tell you the same about Hinduism. It doesn't say, yeah, you can, you know, love Shiva and you can uh,
Hmm.
enter the kingdom of heaven. It doesn't say that. And neither does Islam or even the Jewish faith. Judaism doesn't either, although they don't preach and convert so much. But they have also, their books are very dogmatic and I mean, they're very rigid as well, you know. So that's a big difference between what I would call as monotheistic religions, Abrahamic faiths, and Indic religions, which are, you know, these four uh, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and Sanatana Dharma, which is Hinduism, which came out of, I guess they came out from India. But there's others. There's Baha'i faith. There's Zoroastrianism. There are pagans, atheists, agnostics, new atheists. All these people, you know, they don't have an exclusivist ideology. You know, they're not about God or a prophet. Some of them don't even have a book. It's just about being a good human being a moral person, doing the right thing, you know, respecting
Hmm.
the divine source, know the universal consciousness, and live and let be. So I think the world would do better with that kind of framework. And I'm even going to be writing a book on this kind of dharmic framework as a future of humanity, as a future for humanity. I think it's a good model to have, and there are different facets to it. But one of them would be complete mutual respect for all faiths
Hmm.
and religion, and uh, you know, real freedom to it. I think this is secular. US is secular in the sense that you can practice whatever faith you want. However, it's predominant. It's a Christian faith.
Hmm.
It's a Christian nation, and you have to understand that as long as it doesn't infiltrate into the legal system, sometimes
And
it
it
has
does.
some
Yeah.
for the well, sometimes you can't do that. You know, if it's truly secular, because secularism means total separation.
Hmm.
India is secular. India is the perverse example of secularism, where you have a situation there where 85% of the country is one religion. However, technically, you can't call that country of that religion. So technically, India is not a Hindu nation, even though Hinduism originated there. So I think that's where secularism goes too far,
And
where
oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
no, I was yeah, it has, you know, I think it's hurt a lot of proud Hindus who are like, what are you doing?
Hmm.
You know, and the constitution is predominantly, it's very anti-religion. It's very kind of, and it kind of does not shield the majority religion. So the minorities actually have kind of more rights there, you know.
Well, and like how some people do say that America is a Christian nation, and there is a statistical majority of Christians in America, but we can't forget that America was founded on secularism and separation of church and state and freedom from religion or freedom of religion to practice any religion you want to.
And that's what a true democracy is, right? Yeah.
And that's my previous guest Fatali Mogadam, he would say that there is no pure democracy anywhere in the world, that all forms of
Yeah.
democracy are tempered with other forms of economic and political systems. And to go back to the point of why has yoga been kind of removed from this in the West, and I think it comes down to a pretty simple situation of marketability, and as well as who is the ones propagating this new form of yoga. They aren't necessarily going to be Hindus. So
Yeah, that's right. They're not Indians or Hindus. They're West
mhm,
people who don't, they're usually agnostic. They're not Christian. I mean, they're people who probably are spiritual but not religious, right?
mhm,
They don't identify with any religion as such. Uh, and you're right, it's marketability, but it shouldn't be,
mhm,
because I think it doesn't happen with other spiritual practices as it does with yoga. And it's not okay though, because I think in the process you alienate, or you, it's kind of a gross injustice to the truth
mhm,
of what yoga really is. And I think now they're going, it's one thing to not mention the its Hindu roots or connection, but I think they're going out of their way to say that it's definitely not, you know, like Hinduism is a bad thing. I think they're painting a inaccurate picture of the faith where this comes from.
mhm.
And that's also not okay. And sometimes it comes out of ignorance, and sometimes it's just coming from just pure, uh, I don't know, some kind of malice in some weird form. I don't get. I don't
Well,
get that at
it's
all.
fear
But
of the other. I
yes,
think a lot has to do with it. It's a lot of it
yeah.
is
But
human
this
nature
group
and history.
group shouldn't, you're right, but this group of spiritual but not religious shouldn't have fear of other spiritual wisdom faiths, and we were not talking about radical Islam or something like that that is
Mm-hmm.
has been problematic for the world at large. We're talking about something very different, and
Right.
I think they need to know the difference between the faiths and know their histories,
Well,
maybe.
if you go back to the earlier times in these religions' history, and you follow them along the timeline, you see, these monotheistic Abrahamic religions became very militaristic and spread
Oh
out
yeah,
across the world.
world.
So,
Yeah,
by very virtue of a peaceful, secularist kind of
yeah,
religion, it it by the nature of that has no other option than to kind of get trampled on a little bit, because the
yeah.
machine of the West and
You're
the
right about that. The
imperialism.
Indic faiths have suffered. They have suffered. They Buddhism was wiped out of the face of India by people don't realize that. They always ask me, Buddhism came from India. Buddha was a Indian. He was a Hindu Indian prince. What happened? It was flourishing at one point, and then it just disappeared. Well, we had Islamic invaders come, and that's how they got destroyed. But why didn't Hinduism get destroyed? Because Buddhism was conformed to the monasteries, and Hinduism persevered through society. So it was a layperson's faith, and Buddhism was study and sort of more. You go to a
Mhm.
monastery, go to a monk, you learn. And so that's why when the invaders came, they were able to just destroy all the monasteries, and with it, it took out the religion. But with Hinduism, it was everyone and his dog was, it was so in their blood. You can't, they, yes, they massacred a lot of people, but you can't kill hundreds of millions
Mhm.
of people either. They never, they failed miserably in India.
Mhm.
The global, um, I guess that dream of a caliphate that stops in India. It failed miserably. It's like a That's why I think there's a lot of Islamic groups as well that are very anti-India, because on some deep level, India is it's like their biggest failure, because wherever they go, they convert the whole land within a matter of decades. And with India, even after 800 years, they got minimum 10%,
Mhm.
and even that too with cross marriages and conversions and stuff. So it's not like anybody actually out of their own love and seeking decided to convert. So
Mhm.
you find this deep disdain for Hinduism that comes from Arab world
Mhm.
and a lot of Muslims, and they can't explain it maybe, but India represents, and even in one of their hadith, which is, so you have the Quran, and then you have the prophet's sayings. One of them is clearly, they talk about the caliphate, the global caliphate, but they talk about India being like, this is the great land with so many people. We need to get to this land and do the conversion, which never happened and will never happen, thankfully. So
And what is the
that
caliphate?
remains to be. Caliphate is like, Ottoman Empire a long time ago had this dream of turning the whole world into a Islamic
Mhm.
state. And they did that when they went to Iran, Iraq,
Right.
Lebanon,
Right.
Afghanistan, because all these they had different religions. They had Zoroastrianism, they were atheist, pagan, whatever. Indonesia had Indic roots and all that, but they converted them. And but it stopped at India. It was
Okay.
unable to
So
succeed
it's just
there.
a
So it's
term for
interesting.
the proliferation of Islam, pretty much.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's a huge distinction between those religions is the type of
Yeah.
religion that conquers and recruits, opposed to the
Yes.
religion that says, "Come if you will," but you
Yes.
know, at your own volition, if it's something,
Yes.
So there's a huge difference in the way that would proliferate across the world, and I think that is probably a huge reason why we see a lot of this stuff just kind of omitted from any of the information, is that Hindus probably weren't the ones that was giving out the information in those areas. They were people who had
That's
appropriated the
true.
information and
Yep.
repurposed
It
it
was
and
people.
co-opted it for their own
You're
benefit.
you're so right. Even historians, like even people who write about India, Indologists, they're all German. You didn't for the longest time you didn't have actual Indian people who research about India and write about India. You had these German people who were fascinated with India. They don't speak Sanskrit. They're not Hindu. They're not Indian. Some of them never even went to India. They just did a lot of self-study, and they came up with these interesting concepts, and they put them out. They got them published, and it's only recently that they've all been refuted and refuted.